The whispers followed Grace Jenkins like shadows as she made her way down the dusty main street of Bozeman, Montana Territory, in 1878. Her simple calico dress couldn't hide the gentle swell of her 5-month pregnancy, and the townsfolk's judgment stung worse than the summer sun beating down on her uncovered head. She kept her chin high despite the murmurs that trailed in her wake, clutching her basket of mending closer to her chest as a shield against their stares. "There she goes again," Mrs. Abernathy Stage whispered to Mrs. Henderson outside the general store. "No husband, no shame, and carrying a child plain as day. What is this town coming to?" Grace pretended not to hear, though the words cut deep. She had grown accustomed to such treatment in the 3 months since she'd arrived in Bozeman. The small Montana town had seemed like the perfect place to start anew after fleeing the scandal back east, but she'd quickly learned that judgment followed a woman like her everywhere. "Excuse me," she murmured as she sidestepped a group of men lounging outside the saloon. One of them, red-faced and reeking of whiskey, blocked her path deliberately. "Well, if it isn't the town's fallen dove," he slurred, leering at her midsection. "Sure you don't want to make another mistake with me, darlin'?" "Let her pass, Douglas," came a deep voice from behind her. Grace turned to see Wyatt Zimmerman, owner of the Circle Z ranch just outside town. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer storm, he cut an imposing figure even without the gun belted at his hip. She'd seen him around town occasionally, but had never spoken to him directly. Like most people, he'd kept his distance from the unmarried, expectant mother who'd mysteriously appeared in their midst. Douglas scowled but shuffled aside, muttering curses under his breath. Wyatt tipped his hat to Grace, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his brim. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she said quietly, lowering her eyes. "You shouldn't be walking these streets alone, Miss Jenkins," he replied, his voice carrying no judgment, only concern. "I have little choice. The mending won't deliver itself." She gestured to her basket of completed sewing jobs, the meager income that kept her fed and housed in Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house. Something flickered in his eyes, then perhaps respect, perhaps pity. Grace couldn't tell which and wasn't sure which would be worse. "Allow me to escort you," he offered, surprising her. "That's not necessary, I insist." His tone brooked no argument as he fell into step beside her, effectively silencing the whispers with his presence. In Bozeman, Wyatt Zimmerman's word carried weight. His ranch employed half the men in the county, and his cattle drives kept the town's economy afloat. They walked in silence for several moments, Grace acutely aware of the curious stares now directed their way. She wondered what new rumors this would spark. "You're headed to the Peterson place?" he asked finally. "Yes. Mrs. Peterson needs her husband's shirts for when he returns from Helena." Wyatt nodded, his stride automatically shortening to match hers. "You've built quite a reputation for fine needlework." "It's honest work," she replied defensively. "I meant no offense, Miss Jenkins. My sister Martha speaks highly of your skill." Grace softened slightly. Martha Zimmerman was one of the few women in town who had shown her kindness. "Your sister has been very generous with her recommendations." They reached the Peterson homestead, and Grace hesitated before the gate. "Thank you for your escort, Mr. Zimmerman. I can manage from here." Instead of leaving, he studied her face for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Jenkins, I'm looking for someone to do some mending and sewing at the ranch. My hands are constantly tearing their clothes, and Martha can't keep up. Would you be interested?" The offer stunned her. Work at the Circle Z would mean steady income, perhaps enough to save for her child's future. But it would also mean facing new judgment, new whispers. I appreciate the offer, but the pay would be 3 times what you're making now," he continued. And you'd have a cabin to yourself on the property. Her eyes widened. A cabin. It's small but sound. My foreman used it before he married and built his own place. It's sitting empty now. Independence, privacy, security for her child. The offer was almost too good to be true, which made Grace suspicious. Why would you offer this to me, Mr. Zimmerman? You don't know me. His gaze was steady. I know enough. Martha trusts you, and I've seen how you hold your head high despite this town's cruelty. That takes courage. Grace felt her cheeks flush. Some would call it brazenness. Some are fools, he replied simply. Before she could respond, the Petersons' front door opened and Mrs. Peterson appeared, her eyebrows shooting up at the sight of Wyatt standing with Grace. I'll consider your offer, Mr. Zimmerman, Grace said quickly. Thank you. He tipped his hat again. I'll call at Mrs. Whittaker's tomorrow for your answer. Good day, Miss Jenkins. As he strode away, Grace felt Mrs. Peterson's curious gaze boring into her. She braced herself for more judgment as she approached the house. I've brought your mending, Mrs. Peterson. The woman took the basket, barely looking at the neatly repaired shirts inside. I saw you with Wyatt Zimmerman. What business does a man like that have with you? Grace forced a polite smile. Just a chance encounter. He was kind enough to escort me. Mrs. Peterson's lips pinched. You do well to remember your place, Miss Jenkins. Men like Wyatt Zimmerman don't associate with women in your condition. Unless they want something improper. The implication stung, but Grace had grown a thick skin over the past months. The shirts are 2 cents each, madam. That's 40 cents total. Mrs. Peterson counted out the coins with obvious reluctance. I don't think I'll be needing your services anymore after this, she said coldly, pressing the money into Grace's palm. As you wish, Mrs. Peterson. Grace tucked the coins into her pocket, another door closing in her face. By the time she returned to Mrs. Whittaker's boarding house, 2 more clients had canceled their orders. The word had spread quickly. Grace Jenkins was consorting with Wyatt Zimmerman, and that made her even more scandalous than before. Mrs. Whittaker, a stern widow who ran the only boarding house in town that would accept Grace, cornered her in the narrow hallway. I've heard some disturbing rumors, Miss Jenkins, Grace sighed. Mrs. Whittaker, Mr. Zimmerman merely escorted me on my deliveries as a courtesy. The older woman's eyes narrowed. 3 women have asked me today if I'm running a bawdy house now. I cannot have my establishment's reputation tarnished. A cold dread settled in Grace's stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that perhaps it's time you found other accommodations. I'll give you until the end of the week. Grace pressed a hand to her growing belly, feeling the first flutter of movement within. Where am I supposed to go? No one else in town will rent to me. Mrs. Whittaker's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, child. But I have other boarders to consider. That night, alone in her small room, Grace wept silently into her pillow. She had fled Philadelphia with barely more than the clothes on her back after her family had disowned her. The man who had promised her marriage had abandoned her the moment she told him of the child, leaving her with nothing but shame and a growing belly. Bozeman was supposed to be her fresh start, far from the scandal and disgrace. But she had found only more of the same. As dawn broke, Grace made her decision. She would accept Wyatt Zimmerman's offer. What choice did she have? Perhaps at the Circle Z ranch, away from the cruel tongues of town, she and her child might find some peace. When Wyatt arrived at the boarding house that afternoon, Grace was waiting for him on the porch, her meager belongings already packed in a single trunk. His eyebrows rose at the sight. I take it you've made your decision. I have. I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman. But I must be clear, I am only accepting a position as your seamstress. Nothing more. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I wouldn't have offered anything else, Miss Jenkins. My wagon's out front whenever you're ready." The ride to the Circle Z was tense and silent. Grace wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, trading one precarious situation for another. Wyatt Zimmerman was an enigma to her, a wealthy, unmarried rancher in his early 30s who had, for reasons she couldn't fathom, decided to help her. "May I ask why you're really doing this?" she finally ventured as the wagon bumped along the dirt road. Wyatt kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "My sister Martha told me Mrs. Whitaker was planning to evict you. I needed a seamstress. It seemed a simple enough solution." "And you don't mind having a woman in my condition living on your property? What will people say?" He shot her a sideways glance. "Miss Jenkins, I've never much cared what people say about me. You'll find the ranch hands won't give you any trouble, not if they value their jobs." The ranch sprawled across the valley, a collection of sturdy buildings nestled against the backdrop of the mountains. Cattle grazed on the lush summer grass, and horses nickered in corrals near the main house, a two-story structure built of solid timber that spoke of Wyatt's success. He didn't take her to the main house, but instead directed the wagon to a small cabin set apart from the bunkhouse and other outbuildings. It was simple but well built, with a covered porch and a stone chimney. "As I said, it's not much," Wyatt remarked as he helped her down from the wagon. "But it's yours for as long as you need it." Grace stood transfixed, emotion welling in her throat. After months of renting a tiny room with a shared privy, this modest cabin seemed like a palace. "It's perfect," she whispered. The interior was clean and functional, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser, and a lean-to addition that could serve as a nursery. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table and stocked the pantry with basic supplies. "Martha thought you might need some essentials to get started," Wyatt explained, watching her examine the space. "She'll come by tomorrow to see if there's anything else you need." Grace turned to him, overcome. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Zimmerman." "Wyatt," he corrected gently. "And there's no need for thanks. We have an arrangement that benefits us both." He cleared his throat. "I'll have the men bring over the first batch of mending tomorrow. For now, get settled. Supper's at 6 in the main house if you'd care to join us, but Martha can bring you a tray if you prefer." After he left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, for the first time in months, to feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps here, away from the judgmental eyes of town, she could build something for herself and her child. That evening, she gathered her courage and walked to the main house for supper. Martha, a plump, cheerful woman in her late 20s, welcomed her warmly, while Wyatt offered a reserved nod from the head of the table. Two ranch hands, Ben, the foreman, and Eduardo, the cook, rounded out the dinner party. "We're so pleased you've joined us," Martha gushed, filling Grace's plate with beef stew and fresh bread. "Wyatt's men tear through clothes faster than I can mend them, and my needlework has never been very fine." Grace felt Wyatt's eyes on her throughout the meal, assessing but not unkind. He spoke little, letting Martha carry the conversation, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and direct. As the weeks passed, Grace settled into life at the Circle Z. True to Wyatt's word, the ranch hands treated her with respect, tipping their hats when they passed her cabin and thanking her for her skilled repairs. The work was steady but not overwhelming, allowing her time to prepare for the baby's arrival. Martha became a daily visitor and fast friend, bringing gossip from town and helping Grace sew baby clothes from fabric scraps. It was during one of these visits, as they sat together on the cabin's porch, that Martha broached a subject Grace had been avoiding. "You never speak of the baby's father," Martha observed, her fingers working a tiny gown, Grace's hands stilled on her embroidery. "There's nothing to speak of." Martha's kind eyes held no judgment. "You don't have to tell me, but sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." Perhaps it was the genuine concern in Martha's voice, or perhaps it was simply the weight of carrying her secret alone for so long, but Grace found herself talking. "His name was Edward Thornton," she began softly. "The son of my father's business partner in Philadelphia. We were courting and he promised marriage. I believed him." She swallowed hard. "When I told him about the baby, he denied everything, said I was trying to trap him, that I'd been with others. My father believed him over me." Martha reached out and squeezed her hand. "What a dreadful man." "My father gave me a choice: give up the baby for adoption and return to society with a story about visiting ailing relatives, or leave with nothing. I chose my child." Grace's hand rested on her now prominent belly. "I had a small inheritance from my mother that my father couldn't touch. I used it to come west, as far from Philadelphia as I could manage." "And you ended up in Bozeman." Grace nodded. "I thought in a frontier town people might be more forgiving. I was wrong." "People can be cruel everywhere," Martha agreed, "but you found a home here now." Later that evening, after Martha had returned to the main house, Grace was startled by a knock at her door. She opened it to find Wyatt standing there, his expression troubled. "I apologize for disturbing you," he said, "but I need to warn you. Edward Thornton is in town." Grace felt the blood drain from her face. "What? How? Why?" "Apparently, he's representing his father's company, looking to invest in cattle operations in the territory." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Martha overheard his name at the mercantile and recognized it from your story. She came straight to me." Grace sank into a chair, her legs suddenly too weak to support her. "Does he know I'm here?" "I don't think so. Not yet. But Bozeman's a small town and people talk." Her hands trembled as she pressed them against her belly, as if to shield her unborn child from this new threat. "What am I going to do?" "If he finds me, he won't harm you," Wyatt said, his voice low and fierce. "Not while you're under my protection." Grace looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes. "Why do you care what happens to me, Wyatt? Truly?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to the floor before meeting hers again. "Because I know what it's like to be judged for circumstances beyond your control. My father was a drunk who gambled away our family's homestead. When he died, my mother, Martha, and I were left with nothing but his debts and his tarnished name. No one would help us. No one would give us work or extend credit. How did you survive?" "I took any job I could find, worked harder than any two men, built this ranch piece by piece. And I swore I'd never turn my back on someone who needed a second chance." He stepped closer, his voice softening. "You deserve that chance, Grace. You and your child." The use of her first name sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Stay close to the ranch for now," he advised. "I'll find out how long Thornton plans to be in the area." After he left, Grace paced the small confines of her cabin, fear and anger warring within her. The very idea that Edward might be so close sent chills down her spine. What if he discovered her? What if he tried to take her child? She slept fitfully that night, plagued by nightmares of Edward finding her, of being forced to return to Philadelphia in disgrace, of losing her baby. The next morning, Martha arrived earlier than usual, her face pinched with worry. "He's asking about you," she announced without preamble. "I heard it from Mrs. Abernathy, who heard it from the hotel clerk. Thornton was inquiring about a Miss Grace Jenkins who might have arrived in town in the spring." Grace clutched the doorframe for support. "What did they tell him?" "That you're living out at the Circle Z as our seamstress." "Grace, I'm so sorry. I tried to get there before the gossip did, but it's not your fault." Grace moved to the window, scanning the road to the ranch as if expecting to see Edward's approach at any moment. "I knew I couldn't hide forever." Martha touched her arm gently. "Wyatt's gone into town. He said to tell you to stay inside today and he'll handle everything." "Handle everything? Martha, what is he going to do?" "I don't know exactly, but my brother is not a man to be trifled with when he's protecting someone he cares about." The words gave Grace pause. "He cares about me." Martha's eyes softened. "You haven't noticed how he looks at you, how he always finds some excuse to check on you. Wyatt may not be a man of many words, but his actions speak clearly enough." Grace shook her head, bewildered. "That's impossible. I'm carrying another man's child. And, do you think that matters to him? Wyatt judges people by who they are, not by their circumstances." Martha squeezed her hand. "Now, I'm staying right here with you until he returns." The hours crawled by, each creak and distant sound setting Grace's nerves on edge. By late afternoon, when they heard hoofbeats approaching, she was nearly sick with anxiety. But it was Wyatt who appeared at the door, his expression grim but controlled. "He's gone," he announced without preamble. "Gone? What do you mean?" Grace asked. Wyatt removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I had a conversation with Mr. Thornton. Explained to him that he wasn't welcome at the Circle Z and that if he had any intention of bothering you, he'd have to come through me first." Grace could only imagine that conversation. Wyatt's imposing presence and reputation would be intimidating to a city man like Edward. And he just left. "After I made it clear that every rancher and businessman in the territory would hear about how he abandoned his responsibilities back east if he didn't leave you in peace." A ghost of a smile touched Wyatt's lips. He seemed quite concerned about his reputation. "But that's not the end of it," Grace said, sinking into a chair. "He knows where I am now. He could return or send someone else. He could try to take my child." Wyatt knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his calloused ones. "Grace, look at me." She raised her eyes to his, finding them steady and reassuring. "I made him sign a document renouncing any claim to your child. Judge Harmon witnessed it. It's legally binding." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes. "You did that for me." "I did it for both of you," he said softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Martha, who had been quietly observing the exchange, cleared her throat. "I should go start supper. Will you be joining us tonight, Grace?" "Yes, thank you," Grace replied, not taking her eyes from Wyatt's face. After Martha left, Wyatt rose to his feet, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "I should let you rest." "Wait." Grace caught his hand. "I don't know how to thank you. What you did today was only right," he finished for her. "You don't need to thank me for that. But I do. No one has stood up for me like that since, well, ever." She blinked back tears. "You're a good man, Wyatt Zimmerman." Something shifted in his expression then, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "Not everyone would agree with you." "I don't care what everyone thinks. I know what I've seen." For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Wyatt gently withdrew his hand. "I'll see you at supper, Grace." As summer faded into autumn, life at the Circle Z settled into a comfortable rhythm. Grace's belly grew rounder, and her friendship with Wyatt deepened. He began stopping by her cabin most evenings, sometimes bringing a book to read aloud or simply sitting with her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and crimson. They rarely spoke of Edward Thornton or the past, focusing instead on the present and the future. Wyatt seemed genuinely interested in her plans for the baby, offering to build a cradle and helping her prepare the small lean-to as a nursery. One crisp October evening, as they sat before the fireplace in her cabin, Grace felt the baby kick particularly hard. Without thinking, she reached for Wyatt's hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel that? He's quite the little fighter." Wyatt asked, his expression softening with wonder as he felt the movement beneath his palm. Grace smiled. "Just a feeling. though I'd be equally happy with a daughter." Wyatt's hand lingered on her belly, his touch gentle. "Either way, this child is lucky to have you as a mother." "I hope so," she said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being selfish, bringing a child into the world without a father." Wyatt was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "A child needs love and security more than anything. You can provide that. But will it be enough? The world can be cruel to those who don't fit neatly into its expectations." "Then we change those expectations," he said simply. "Or we create our own world where they don't matter." The word "we" hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Grace studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight cleft in his chin, the way his eyes reflected the flames. In the month since he'd offered her sanctuary, Wyatt had become more than her employer, more than her protector. He'd become the person she most looked forward to seeing each day, the one whose opinion mattered most, whose smile could brighten even her darkest moments. "Wyatt," she began hesitantly, "why have you never married?" The question seemed to startle him, and he withdrew his hand from her belly, leaning back in his chair. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. I find that hard to believe. A successful rancher like you must have had many opportunities." He shrugged, his expression guarded. "Building the ranch took all my time and attention for years, and then, well, I guess I got used to my own company." Grace sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they preferred to keep private. She, of all people, understood that. The baby kicked again, and she winced slightly. "Are you all right?" Wyatt asked, concern immediately replacing his reticence. "Just uncomfortable. The baby's getting stronger every day. You should rest. I've kept you up too late." He rose to his feet but hesitated before heading to the door. "Grace, there's something I've been meaning to discuss with you." Her heart quickened. "Yes. When the baby comes, you'll need help. More than just Martha dropping by. I was thinking we could hire a woman from town to stay with you for a while." It wasn't what she'd expected him to say, and Grace couldn't help the flicker of disappointment. "That's thoughtful of you, but I'm not sure anyone in town would be willing to help me." "They will if I'm paying their wages." His tone was matter of fact. "And after, when you're recovered." "Well, I want you to know that your position here is secure, for as long as you want it." "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than I can say." He nodded, seemingly satisfied, and moved toward the door. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Wyatt." After he left, Grace remained by the fire, her thoughts in turmoil. She was developing feelings for Wyatt Zimmerman, feelings that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. But what could come of it? She was an unwed mother, carrying another man's child. And despite his kindness, Wyatt had given no clear indication that he saw her as anything more than someone in need of his protection. The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Grace, now in her 8th month, found her movements increasingly restricted by her swollen belly. Martha spent more time at the cabin, helping with the mending and keeping Grace company. "You're glowing," Martha remarked one afternoon as they worked together on a quilt for the baby. "Impending motherhood suits you." Grace smiled, running a hand over her rounded stomach. "I'm excited to meet this little one, though I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous about the birth." "That's natural. But Doc Wilson is experienced with deliveries, and I'll be right by your side." Martha hesitated, then added, "And Wyatt will be nearby, I'm sure. He's barely left the ranch since you entered your 8th month." Grace looked up sharply. "What do you mean? Haven't you noticed? He's turned down 2 cattle buying trips and a meeting in Helena. Said he needed to stay close to home. Because of me." Martha's smile was knowing. "Why else? He cares for you, Grace, more than he's willing to admit even to himself. Grace shook her head, unwilling to hope. He feels responsible for me, that's all. Is that what you tell yourself? Martha set down her sewing. Grace Jenkins, my brother may be many things, but he is not a man who acts out of mere obligation. If he's staying close, it's because he wants to be near you. Before Grace could respond, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at her belly. Martha was beside her instantly. What is it, the baby? I don't know, Grace panted as the pain subsided. It's too early. I still have weeks to go. Babies don't always follow our schedules, Martha said gently, helping Grace to the bedroom. Let me examine you. The pain returned twice more while Martha checked her, each wave stronger than the last. You're in labor, Martha confirmed, her expression serious. I need to get Doc Wilson and Wyatt. No, it's too early, Grace protested, fear tightening her chest. Early or not, this baby is coming. Martha squeezed her hand reassuringly. Everything will be fine. First babies often come early. I'll send one of the hands for the doctor and be right back with hot water and linens. Left alone, Grace curled onto her side as another contraction seized her. She tried to breathe through it, as her mother had once told her women did in childbirth, but panic threatened to overwhelm her. What if something went wrong? What if the baby was too small, too weak? The door burst open and Wyatt appeared, his face pale with concern. Martha sent me. She's gone for supplies. It's too early, Grace whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Something's wrong. Wyatt was beside her in an instant, taking her hand in his. Nothing's wrong. Babies come when they're ready, that's all. His voice was steady, calming. Doc Wilson is on his way. You're going to be fine, Grace, both of you. Another contraction gripped her and she clutched his hand tightly, a cry escaping her lips. Breathe, he instructed, his free hand smoothing her hair back from her damp forehead. That's it. In and out. When the pain subsided, she looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. I'm scared, Wyatt. His expression softened. I know, but you're the strongest woman I've ever known, Grace Jenkins. You can do this. Martha returned with armfuls of supplies and Wyatt reluctantly stepped back. I'll wait outside. No, Grace said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. Please stay, at least until the doctor arrives. He nodded, moving to a chair in the corner of the room while Martha bustled about, preparing for the birth. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and fear for Grace. The doctor arrived as the sun was setting, his face grim as he examined her. The baby's turned wrong, he announced. I'm going to have to try to shift it. What happened next was agony beyond anything Grace had imagined. She screamed as the doctor worked, her fingers crushing Wyatt's hand as he held her through it. At one point, she was certain she was dying, the pain so intense that darkness crowded the edges of her vision. Stay with me, Grace, Wyatt's voice commanded, cutting through the fog. Look at me. You're doing so well. She focused on his face, on his eyes that never left hers, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. One more push, the doctor ordered. Now, Grace gathered her remaining strength and pushed with everything she had. There was a moment of searing pain, then blessed release, followed by the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. A boy, the doctor announced, holding up the tiny, red-faced infant. Small but strong lungs. Tears of relief and joy streamed down Grace's face as Martha cleaned the baby and placed him in her arms. He was indeed small, but perfect, a tuft of dark hair, miniature fingers that curled around her own, eyes that blinked open to reveal a deep blue that might someday turn brown. Hello, little one, she whispered, cradling him close. I'm your mother. Wyatt stood watching from the foot of the bed, his expression a mixture of awe and something else Grace couldn't quite name. Would you like to hold him? She offered impulsively. Wyatt hesitated, then stepped forward, carefully taking the swaddled infant from her arms. His large hands looked impossibly gentle as they cradled the baby, and his eyes softened as the child gurgled up at him. "He's perfect," Wyatt murmured. "What will you call him?" Grace had been considering names for months, but in that moment, seeing Wyatt holding her son, she knew. "Samuel, after my grandfather, Samuel Jenkins." Wyatt nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "It suits him." The doctor cleared his throat. "The mother needs rest now. Everyone out." Reluctantly, Wyatt handed Samuel back to Grace. "I'll be close if you need anything," he promised before following Martha and the doctor from the room. Grace drifted into exhausted sleep with her son nestled against her chest. Her last conscious thought a prayer of gratitude for the new life in her arms and for the man who had stayed by her side through the darkest hours. The next days passed in a haze of fatigue and wonder for Grace. Samuel, though small, proved to be a healthy baby with a hearty appetite and strong lungs. Martha was a constant presence, showing Grace how to nurse and swaddle, how to bathe the tiny body and soothe his cries. Wyatt visited daily, bringing small gifts: a hand-carved wooden horse for when Samuel was older, a rocking chair for Grace to nurse him in, fresh flowers for her bedside. He seemed fascinated by the baby, watching with undisguised interest as Grace cared for him. A week after Samuel's birth, as Grace sat in the new rocking chair by the fire, nursing her son, Wyatt arrived with a covered basket. "Martha sent supper," he explained, setting it on the table. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," Grace admitted with a smile, "but happy, so happy." Wyatt nodded, his gaze moving to Samuel at her breast. A flush crept up his neck, and he quickly averted his eyes. "I should go." "You don't have to," Grace said. "He's almost finished, and I'd welcome the company." After a moment's hesitation, Wyatt took a seat opposite her, his eyes carefully focused on her face. "The hands have been asking about you both. They've taken quite an interest in young Samuel." "That's kind of them. Please thank them for the blanket they sent. It was a lovely gesture." "They've come to respect you, Grace. We all have." She smiled, shifting Samuel to her shoulder to burp him. "I never expected to find such acceptance here, after Bozeman." "Bozeman," Wyatt said with a frown. "I heard something today that I should tell you about. There's been talk in town." Grace's smile faded. "About me, about us." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Apparently there's a rumor circulating that Samuel is my child and that I've set you up as my mistress here at the ranch," Grace gasped. "That's outrageous. Who would say such a thing? Does it matter?" "People will talk regardless of the truth." Wyatt's expression was troubled. "I'm concerned about how these rumors might affect you and Samuel, your reputations." "My reputation was already in tatters," Grace pointed out, a hint of bitterness in her voice. "And Samuel is too young to care what people say." "But he won't always be young. Someday he'll go to school in town. Someday he'll hear the whispers." Grace held Samuel closer, protective instinct flaring. "What are you suggesting?" Wyatt took a deep breath, then met her eyes directly. "Marry me, Grace." The words hung in the air between them, stunning her into silence. "It would give Samuel my name," he continued when she didn't respond. "No one would question his place in society, and you'd have the protection of my position in the community." "Marriage is about more than protection and social standing, Wyatt," Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know that." "Do you?" "Because what you're proposing sounds more like a business arrangement than a marriage." A flash of hurt crossed his features. "Is that what you think of me? That I'd propose marriage as a mere transaction?" "I don't know what to think," Grace admitted. "You've never spoken of feelings between us." Wyatt stood abruptly, pacing the small confines of the cabin. "I'm not good with words, Grace. Never have been." but I thought my actions might have spoken for me. Your actions have shown kindness, compassion, generosity, but not love." He stopped pacing, turning to face her. "Then I've failed to make myself clear." He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair. "I love you, Grace Jenkins. I think I have since the day you arrived at the ranch with your head held high despite everything you'd endured. I love your courage, your grace under fire, your gentle heart, and I've come to love this little one too." He touched Samuel's tiny hand with one finger. "I know he's not mine by blood, but I would be honored to be his father in every way that matters." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "Wyatt, I'm not asking you to love me," he hurried on. "Not right away, but I hope that in time you might come to care for me as more than a friend and protector." Grace shifted Samuel to one arm and reached out to touch Wyatt's cheek with her free hand. "I already do," she whispered. Hope blazed in his eyes. "You do? How could I not? You've shown me what a true man of honor looks like, Wyatt Zimmerman. You've given me and Samuel a home when no one else would. You stayed by my side through the darkest hours of childbirth, and you've never once made me feel ashamed of my past." "Is that a yes, then?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Grace smiled through her tears. "Yes. I will marry you, Wyatt, not for protection or for Samuel's name, but because I love you." The kiss they shared was gentle, mindful of the sleeping infant between them, but filled with promise. When they parted, Wyatt's smile was brighter than Grace had ever seen it. "When?" he asked simply. "When what? When will you marry me? Tomorrow? Next week?" Grace laughed softly. "I need time to recover, Wyatt, and to make a dress. I want to look beautiful for you. You already are beautiful." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "But I'll wait as long as you need, just not too long." They were married 3 weeks later in the ranch's main house, with Martha standing as witness and Samuel sleeping peacefully in a basket nearby. Judge Harmon performed the ceremony, and a handful of the ranch hands attended, their usually rough faces softened with genuine happiness for their boss. Grace wore a simple dress of pale blue that Martha had helped her sew, with her hair adorned with wildflowers from the meadow. Wyatt couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on Ben's arm, his expression one of wonderment and love. The vows were traditional, but when it came time for Wyatt to place the ring on Grace's finger, he paused. "I want to add something," he said, his voice carrying clearly to everyone present. "Grace, I take you as my wife and Samuel as my son. I promise to love and protect you both all the days of my life, to be a true husband to you and a true father to him. What God has brought together in love, let no man tear asunder." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears as she repeated similar vows, adding a promise to love Wyatt for the man he was, strong yet gentle, commanding yet kind. When the judge pronounced them man and wife, Wyatt's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing chuckles and a few whoops from the hands. Martha wiped tears from her eyes, and even Judge Harmon looked suspiciously misty. The wedding supper that followed was a joyous affair, with Eduardo outdoing himself on a feast that included roast beef, fresh bread, and a cake that Martha had spent 2 days preparing. The hands presented the couple with a handmade quilt, each square stitched by a different person, symbolizing the community that had come to embrace Grace and Samuel. As twilight descended, Wyatt and Grace slipped away to the main house, which was now their shared home. Martha had volunteered to watch Samuel for the night, giving the newlyweds time alone. In the privacy of the master bedroom, Grace found herself suddenly shy. Despite her love for Wyatt, the intimacy of marriage was new territory, fraught with the shadows of her past mistake. Wyatt seemed to sense her nervousness. "We don't have to rush anything, Grace," he said softly, taking her hands in his. "We have all the time in the world. She looked up at him, at the tenderness in his eyes, and felt her fears melting away. "I want to be your wife in every sense, Wyatt. It's been. I know." He brushed his lips against her forehead. "We'll go slowly." And they did, discovering each other with gentle exploration and whispered words of love. Wyatt's touch was reverent, his patience infinite as he helped Grace reclaim intimacy as something beautiful, an expression of love rather than a source of shame. Later, cradled in his arms, Grace felt a contentment she had never known before. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured against his chest. Wyatt's arms tightened around her. "This is just the beginning, Mrs. Zimmerman." Her new name sent a thrill through her. Grace Zimmerman. Wife. Mother. No longer defined by her mistakes or the judgments of others. Samuel thrived under the love of both his parents. Though Wyatt wasn't his biological father, no one watching them together could doubt the depth of his devotion to the boy. He spent hours with Samuel in his arms, talking to him about the ranch, showing him the horses, reading to him from the books that lined the study shelves. By Samuel's first birthday, he was a sturdy, happy child with Grace's green eyes and a smile that could charm even the most hardened ranch hand. The celebration brought the entire ranch community together, with even some of the townspeople who had once shunned Grace now attending, their former judgment softened by the obvious happiness of the Zimmerman family. As the party wound down and guests departed, Grace found Wyatt standing on the porch, watching the sunset with Samuel sleeping against his shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, slipping her arm around his waist. He smiled down at her. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am. A year ago, I was a lonely rancher with a successful business but an empty house. Now I have a family." Grace rested her head against his arm. "We're the lucky ones, Wyatt. You gave us a home when no one else would. You gave the home meaning." He kissed the top of her head, then carefully shifted Samuel in his arms. "I should put this little man to bed." "Wait," Grace said, a smile playing at her lips. "I have something to tell you first." Wyatt raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I visited Doc Wilson yesterday." She took a deep breath, joy bubbling up inside her. "We're going to have another baby in about 7 months." Wyatt's face transformed with wonder. "Another baby? Are you sure?" Grace nodded, laughing as Wyatt pulled her into a one-armed embrace, careful not to squish Samuel between them. "This is wonderful news," he murmured against her hair. "How are you feeling?" "Happy. A little nervous, but mostly just grateful." Wyatt drew back to look into her eyes. "I love you, Grace Zimmerman. And I love you, Wyatt Zimmerman, more than I ever thought possible." 6 months later, as winter settled over the Montana territory once again, Grace stood at the window of the nursery, watching fat snowflakes drift from a leaden sky. Samuel played at her feet, stacking wooden blocks that Wyatt had carved for him, while her hand rested on her swollen belly. So much had changed in the span of a year and a half. The woman who had arrived in Bozeman broken and alone, scorned for her unwed pregnancy, was now the respected wife of one of the territory's most successful ranchers. The child she had feared might be born into a world of judgment and whispers was growing into a happy, confident boy who adored his father. And the baby now growing within her would be born into a family filled with love and acceptance. The sound of horses in the yard drew her attention, and Grace smiled as she recognized Wyatt returning from a trip into town. Samuel heard it too, abandoning his blocks to toddle to the window, pointing excitedly. "Yes, that's your papa," Grace confirmed, ruffling his dark curls. "Let's go greet him." By the time they reached the front door, Wyatt was stomping snow from his boots on the porch. His face lit up at the sight of them, and he swept Samuel into his arms before bending to kiss Grace. "How are my favorite people?" he asked, his hand automatically moving to Grace's belly where their second child grew. "Missing you," Grace replied with a smile. "Did you finish your business in town?" "All done." Wyatt carried Samuel into the warm house, Grace following behind, and I ran into Martha. "She's coming for dinner with that new school teacher she's been seeing." Grace raised her eyebrows. "So it's serious enough for family dinners now. I'm glad. Martha deserves happiness." "She does." Wyatt set Samuel down near his toys, then turned to Grace, his expression suddenly serious. "I saw Mrs. Abernathy in town too. She asked after you." Grace stiffened slightly. Mrs. Abernathy had been one of the cruelest gossips during her time in Bozeman. What did she want? To apologize, believe it or not. Wyatt took Grace's hands in his. "She said she's been reflecting on how she treated you, and she's ashamed. She asked if you might consider attending her Christmas gathering next week." Grace was silent for a long moment, memories of the painful whispers and judging stares washing over her. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd ask you. It's your decision, Grace." She considered it, weighing the hurt of the past against the happiness of her present. I think I'd like to go, not for her sake but for mine. To show that I'm not hiding anymore, that I'm proud of my family, all of it." Wyatt's smile was approving. "That's my brave wife." He pulled her close, mindful of her pregnancy. "You know, when I first saw you in town that day being harassed by Douglas, I never imagined where it would lead." "No," Grace teased. "You didn't immediately envision marriage and children." He laughed. "I knew you were special. I knew you had more courage than anyone I'd ever met, but I didn't know you'd change my life so completely." "You changed mine too," she reminded him. "You saw me when everyone else looked away. You believed in me when no one else would." Samuel toddled over, demanding attention, and Wyatt lifted him high, eliciting giggles from the boy. "And look what came of it," he said softly. "A family. A real family." As Grace watched her husband and son together, feeling the gentle movement of her second child within her, she thought of the journey that had brought her here. The pain and rejection, the fear and uncertainty, the kindness of a stranger that had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. She had been mocked for being unmarried with child, scorned by society and abandoned by those who should have protected her. But in the end, it had led her to this moment, to this life that was richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. "A real family," she agreed, joining them in a warm embrace. "Our family." In the years that followed, the Zimmerman family continued to grow and flourish. Grace gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth, followed 2 years later by twins, a boy and a girl, Robert and Rebecca. Samuel grew into a fine young man who eventually took over management of parts of the ranch, showing Wyatt's head for business combined with Grace's compassionate heart. The Circle Z expanded to become one of the largest and most respected ranching operations in Montana, known for fair dealings and progressive practices. Wyatt and Grace used their influence to advocate for women in difficult circumstances, establishing a fund to help unwed mothers find work and housing. And sometimes, when they sat together on the porch of the main house, watching their children and grandchildren play in the yard, Grace would remember that day in Bozeman when a tall, serious rancher had stood up for a pregnant woman everyone else had scorned. "Marry me today," he had said, offering her not just his name but his heart, his future, his everything. And she had said yes, never once regretting the decision that had transformed her from an outcast to a beloved wife, mother, and pillar of the community. They had built their love and their legacy on a foundation of compassion and courage, proving that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of kindness and the willingness to see beyond circumstances to the true worth of a person's heart.